Hello. Today I'm talking about the 12th house. Yesterday I did a video on stelliums through the houses, and really anytime we take that approach to breaking down the significations of things, whether it be, houses or signs or what a planet means or anything like that. There's a way to do it to smash everything into one video in a reasonable, watchable, digestible amount of time. But there is always nuance that lacks. And if we take that approach, if we choose to skim over the surface and go broad rather than deep into one thing at a time. And so there are benefits. There are benefits and downsides to taking either approach, right? If we go super deep into one thing, we could lose sight of the big picture, of the context, how that one particular thing fits into the general context of astrology or of the birth chart. If it's, one part of your chart, one planet, and its condition that you're analyzing. A placement, again, aspects connect that planet to everything else in your birth chart. So to isolate one part of your chart is necessarily, to some degree, to lose sense of the big picture and the context surrounding it, which obviously affects its condition all the time. Okay. And then you get like the mad scientist approach by diving deep into one thing. And then conversely, if you only skim over the surface and try to look at the big picture and lose sense of what each individual part means, then you lose a lot of nuance doing that, right? So anyway, anytime we're taking that broad approach, like I did yesterday in the video about stelliums through the houses, we get to the 12th house because typically I go 1 through 12, like anyone naturally would be inclined to do. By the time I get to the 12th house, I don't really have enough energy for going deeply enough into the 12th house to even give a reasonable general description of it. And the 12th house, as with anything, really deserves its own container, its own time, without strict limits, because it is the place of the unlimited. So to try to attach words to the 12th house is not to give us the full picture, because language is only one means that we have of understanding things. And the 12th house is the place where the normal laws of language and logic, for that matter, don't really apply. Even logic itself is a tool that we use ultimately for pragmatic ends. Okay. Yes, it's beyond the material, but what we aim our logical approaches toward depends on a value judgment. And that comes down to us and our preferences. We can use logic for good or for evil. We can use it to improve the world or to destroy it. Maybe some things need to be destroyed, but there's a value judgment underlying why it is we've decided to destroy this and not that. So the 12th house is where we enter existential dilemmas like that, moral dilemmas of the broadest sort. And so as I was going through, the stelliums through the houses, and I got to the 12th house, I did what I pretty much always do anytime I'm doing an analysis of the 12 houses. 12th house kind of needs its own video, kind of needs its own time, So if you look at, this is a Hellenistic conception of the house significations, we could say, with the planetary joys, which aren't necessarily about rulership, but more so, I guess we could say they're more aligned with exaltation. Like they're the exaltations of the houses, similar to how we would have exaltation of planets, where a planet is exalted doesn't necessarily show where it is in the most raw form, like Aries and Mars, but rather where that planet has its fullest expression and its most well-rounded expression. It provides us with a context of life that allows that planet to shine in its truest and most uninhibited form. But in that context, with exaltation, within that condition, we could say there are internal balancing factors for providing us with, an opportunity to keep that planet in check, as to not let it get out of control. So the planetary joys in the Hellenistic tradition point to where the planets tend to be the happiest. So we have Venus in the fifth house. Fifth house is about pleasure. It's also about children, where romance leads, if it's pleasurable enough and leads to orgasm. Okay, a child is born. It's also about values and creativity, fun. All right. Creative expression and creation. So Venus loves all of those things. And so if you have Venus in your fifth house in your birth chart, it's a really good place for Venus to be, depending on the sign. But generally speaking, that context of life that the fifth house represents, you have a conscious part of yourself that is aligned with those things: pleasure and fun and romance and children and creativity, situated in the house of pleasure and fun and romance and creativity. So it's it finds a very natural place for expression, and it really knows how to enjoy life, whereas Mars is very work oriented. It's very action oriented. So the sixth house is a great place for Mars to be, disregarding any other bad aspects or tough sign placements or anything like that. Putting all of the context aside, and again, we're only going to get limited value by analyzing anything that way, by disregarding overall context. But generally speaking, the sixth house is a great place for Mars, because Mars is so action oriented. It's our kind of masculine vitality, and it's the thing that wants to work. It's how we do what we do, and it's how we go after what we want. It's not necessarily the things that we want and like. That would be more Venus. But Mars has to work. Mars has to be exerted. It's an energy that needs a container. And the sixth house things are the things that none of us really enjoy doing. It's about getting even. It's about paying your bills. It's about daily routine. It's about taking care of your health. It's about making sure that things don't spin out of control. It's about making sure that things don't get too bad off, right? That we don't fall too far behind with regard to our health or our bills or our daily routines, cleanliness, keeping the house up, chores. Okay, things that we tend to put off fall in the sixth house. And so if Mars is there, Mars just does it. Again, depending on the sign. Okay. It's a good place for Mars to be. So it has a joy there. People with Mars, their birth Mars in their sixth house, tend to enjoy mundane work, stuff that other people really don't like to do or tend to avoid, you know. So anyway, kind of want to get into the 12th house, and this is a good springboard because the 6th house is opposite the 12th house. So, you know, these material things, material aspects of our being, our health, our chores, our duties, 6th house, duty. Okay. Things that we have a duty to take care of. What tends to result whenever we neglect those really essentially more material things? Mental health is affected. Spiritual, our spiritual beings, our spirits begin to lose traction, lose grounding, because we're not doing what we have to do, what we have a duty to do. 6th house. And 12th house is the place of hospitals and mental asylums and isolation. Okay. What happens when you let 6th house stuff spin out of control? And you neglect them. You neglect your duties. You end up in the hospital because you're not taking care of your health. You end up in a mental asylum because you've gone insane, because you don't have grounding in the material world. You end up in isolation because people leave you, because you don't have a groundedness and a stability about you that healthy relationships with others actually need. Like, you can only be as good of a friend and as good of a person and family member to someone else as you are to yourself. So you have to take care of yourself. Otherwise, you can't give of yourself in a selfless and meaningful and valuable way. Right? So it's these 12th house things that are unconsciously affected whenever the 6th house is neglected. And it's not about the physical spaces, you know, like when we're trying to understand the 12th house, you can't be a stupid, like memorization based student. And this is the problem with a lot of people in the West. Okay. They think, oh, okay, the 4th house means this, the 8th house means this, Aries means this, Taurus means this, 12th house means this. And they write down the keywords and they're like, okay, I understand those words. I think, all right, got it. I understand the 4th house, the 8th house, Aries, Taurus, 12th house. No, that's not it. Okay. This is why it takes practice. It takes having conversations. It takes contemplation. All right. We just use keywords to key you into the right hole, you know, into the right direction for understanding this area of life or this sign, which is an expression, a style of personality. Okay. So the 12th house is very elusive. It's very evasive. When it comes to keywords, people attach words to it like hospitals, mental asylums, isolation. No, it's not about those physical spaces, those physically isolated spaces. In a sense, the 12th house is not about the material world at all. It's about the spiritual reality, the metaphysical universe that we actually live in, that actually gives some formal grounding to everything that we can actually observe. So the first 11 houses signify, this is another way of conceptualizing the houses. I pulled up 2 charts so you could see some of the different ways to think about these things, different keywords. Collective unconscious, psychic abilities. Yeah, you have to tap into the metaphysical whenever you're tapping into your psychic abilities, right? Obviously. So the first 11 houses, more or less, are about the physical world. Even the 8th house is psychological. And 8th house problems have strong correlations with functions in the brain. Like a lot of 8th house problems can actually be solved more or less by taking a pill and alleviating the effects of one's depression and anxiety. Sometimes all you need is like just some material order and structure to sort out those psychological issues that you have. But if an issue is more of a 12th house nature, No treating of symptoms is going to solve that problem necessarily. It has to be, first of all, grounded in sixth house things, because the chart wheel it's about polarity. It's about conceptualizing reality in a polar dualistic way. Everything has an sort of an opposite but equal reactive quality to itself. And that is an opposite sign, an opposite house. Place too much emphasis on one side of the chart, what is directly opposite that part of the chart is going to unconsciously manifest. Okay. And this could not be more clear than in a chart wheel. But in a sense, this can be misleading, right? Because reality itself, truth, is not dualistic in nature. Duality is a pragmatic tool that our minds create anytime we create a concept. We come up with a concept, we immediately create two categories: everything that fits within that concept and everything that is excluded from it. We draw a boundary between things, which has its uses. It's pragmatic, but it's not true. The only thing that's true is truth with a capital T. And that is something that the 12th house is trying to get us to understand, is that the first 11 houses are about some aspect of material reality. Even the 8th house, even the 9th house, higher beliefs and philosophy, religions. Okay, lessons that we take. It's not travel itself, but it's lessons we take from foreign travel and from cultural experiences that teach us something about life. It's not about philosophy in the academic sense. It's about what you actually learn and use to improve your worldview, your belief system. So 9th house is still about concepts. It's about improving the conceptual structure of reality within your mind. It's about what you believe. And we can constantly improve that all the time. The 12th house, but again, you're going to be improving your belief system somewhat, at the very least, on the basis of what works best for me. And that isn't true. It's just true enough for you, given the context that you're in and the position you're in at a given point in your life. That's what the 12th house is trying to get us to understand, is that everything else is material, reduces to, pragmatism, materialism, usefulness, togetherness. Okay. 11th house, togetherness. So this is all material. And then this is everything else. 12th house represents everything that the chart wheel cannot account for. And it's the one piece of the house wheel, the house chart wheel, that ultimately is trying to send us the message that duality is a myth. It's a mistaken way of thinking. And it's one that we can't really escape, right? Which is why we find a place for it and a little pizza slice that's no bigger than any of the others within the chart wheel. We say, okay, there's all this unknown and unconscious and metaphysical reality that we will never understand. Where are we going to fit that in our conception of the different contexts of life as represented by the astrological houses? We'll just put it here in the last house, in the 12th house. Okay. So this is why the 12th house is so hard to understand, because it's about everything that cannot be understood. All right. So how do you approach it? How do you approach an understanding of it in a more accurate way? First of all, do you have any planets in the 12th house in your birth chart? What is it that planet represent, or those planets represent? How do those planets show up in your life? What do you use them for? Those actions and those thoughts, let's say if it's the moon, there's a lot of processing that goes on with the moon. Okay. Let's say it's Venus. It's about how you seek pleasure. among other things. If you're a man, it's kind of what you look for in a woman and what your relationship to femininity is. If it's a woman, it's how you express your femininity. It's just an example. Look at whatever planet you have in the 12th house, if any. Look at what that planet represents and how it is that you express those kinds of things in life. That's going to give you some insight on your perception of things of the 12th house. So someone with Mars in the 12th house has this insane abundance of energy, physical energy that will never be satisfied. There is no amount of exercise, physical exertion, sex that is going to fully satisfy you. You are unlimited in terms of things of Mars. Okay? So in a sense, it shows where you have no limits. And that can instill some fear within you. It can also lead you to impulsive action, which is why a lot of times people describe the 12th house as being a dangerous place. See, dangers, weakness, suffering. Whenever you act on that area of life that has no limits, sure, great things can result if it's channeled in a safe and appropriate manner. But it can also lead to a hell of a lot of suffering, because it's saying that you're sort of lacking boundaries there in the 12th house, because the 12th house is the place where boundaries disintegrate. So suffering and depression can result depending on what you have there. Now, if you don't have planets in the 12th house, the first way to approach understanding the 12th house is to look at which sign you have on the cusp of your 12th house in your birth chart. That will at least give you a lens, a style of perception and expression for understanding the things of the 12th house. Okay. So if you have Leo on your 12th house cusp, Leo has, as a style of personality, has a big heart, kind of has a big ego, may think highly of themselves, but has a lot to give. Leo is a steady burning fire. Okay. And so you'll have a sort of maybe a warm and fuzzy approach to things like spirituality or to inspiration. Okay. You seek inspiration and you seek to inspire in a spiritual way. Now, it may not be conscious, but it's more about how you're affected. So if you don't have any birth planets in your 12th house, you're still affected by the sign that's in that house. So if it's Leo, what is your relationship to Leo type people like? That's another way to approach it. Somebody might have Virgo in the 5th house, but no planets there. Virgo's on their 5th house cusp. And they may not have a super healthy relationship with Virgo people, because the 5th house is the area of romance and flings and kind of short-term relationships. And so they may see Virgos as unstable people, because the area of their own life, which is short-term flings and romance and fun and creativity, is attracting Virgo type people who may lack maturity and longevity for things like romance and creative projects, things like that. So it depends how mature you are spiritually and how integrated you are, especially with your empty houses. Okay. But for the 12th house, this can be particularly difficult if you don't have a relationship with yourself in that house, which is to say that you would have conscious planets being expressed through that house. Okay. So, what if you don't have any planets there, whatever sign you have there, and learning about that sign, what that archetype of expression represents will teach you a lot about your perception of the 12th house, your relationship to the things of the collective unconscious and to infinity and to spirituality and to isolation. What's your relationship to yourself in terms of being alone? And maybe it's your relationship with suffering and depression, if there are inclinations of that in your own life or in other parts of your chart. Okay, so that's just a little bit on the 12th house, and about the false dualistic nature that astrology seems to provide us with, but actually it's extremely useful. The 12th house is the balancing factor here that is difficult to understand because it's the thing that gives us an opportunity to have a relationship with things beyond concepts themselves, beyond the physical realm, the material realm, the pragmatic realm, what is merely useful for us. Okay. 12th house just represents everything that the first 11 houses are incapable, conceptually and pragmatically incapable of accounting for, and also spiritually incapable of accounting for. Okay. And so where you are on your spiritual path depends on what your relationship is like to the unknown and your own unconscious mind. So that's why that's where learning about the 12th house can really help most deeply as far as spiritual growth goes, because it's everything that we fear because we cannot know. So ultimately, yes, it can cause depression, but it's also a place where ultimate peace can be attained above and beyond the degree of peace that any other house can afford us by far. And then conversely, taking care of the mundane things, because the 6th house is thought of as mundane stuff that has no meaning attached to it beyond the task itself, the work itself. Well, conversely, it has unlimited meaning. And that's an example of how everything has meaning. If even the most mundane things can cause the most deep depression, which would be a 12th house style of depression, then this axis right here, the 6th and 12th, the 6 and 12 axis, shows us where the deepest meaning actually comes from. From the deepest, most distant, and least known kinds of things in the 12th house, but also in the most tangible and most mundane things of the 6th house, the things that we tend to put off. So I hope you enjoyed that video. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.